We're on DAF Vav Amud Aleph. We were learning yesterday that you're not allowed to sell certain products to an akum, to an idolater. The first one we saw that we discussed is that you're not allowed to sell a behema daka, a small farm animal, because, and by the way, that's only dependent upon minhag, because there may be a concern about them committing bestiality. But the Gemara's conclusion was that technically, unless there's a minhag otherwise, you're allowed to, because once they purchase the animal for themselves, they're not going to depreciate the value of the animal by sterilizing it in the course of fulfilling their lust. Mm-hmm. So therefore, it's all dependent upon minhag. But then the Mishnah had said that uvechol makom ein mochen behema gasa, but you're never allowed to sell a large farm animal, like a beast of burden, that's going to pull a plow, such as a donkey or a cow or an ox. So the Gemara's question is, what's the problem? My time and nehidel revialo chayshinan, mavid be malacha chayshinan. And the reason is because even though we're not concerned about they're committing bestiality, because they're not going to depreciate their own investment, but we are concerned about them doing malacha with the animal on Shabbos. Now, why should we worry about that? That's the Gemara's next question. Mm-hmm. So, v'ni avid, kevin dezavna kanya. Who cares if the animal does malacha on Shabbos? It belongs to the Gentile. He bought it. The animal is in his name now. What's the concern? Now, we know that a Jew's animal may not work on Shabbos, but once the Jew sells it, it's not his anymore. So the Gemara answer is gezerah mishum she'ela umishum schirus. So the Gemara's answer is that there's a concern that if we allow you to sell it, you may come to lend it or rent it to a Gentile, in which case you'll retain ownership of it, and then the goy will do work with it on Shabbos, and your animal will end up working on Shabbos. But the Gemara says, wait a minute, she'ila kanya va'agra kanya. I don't understand. When a person rents or a person borrows, the animal, for all intensive purposes, becomes the property of the borrower or the renter. And that's the reason why he has certain liability responsibilities for the animal. So even if you lend it or rent it, it should still be the property of the Gentile. So what's the problem? Ela amar rami bereda Rabbi Yiba gezerah mishum nisyune. Dezimnin dezavno lihalei samach lishkia sachama demale shabta va'amar le ta nasye nihalei v'shamale lekale va'ozla machmasei v'nichale detezel v'havalei mechamer achar behemto b'Shabbos v'hamachamer achar behemto b'Shabbos chayiv chatas. Let me explain what I just read. It was a long piece. So the Gemara's answer is like this. It's a concern out of test driving. What do we mean by test driving? A Jew wants to sell his animal to the goy. The goy says, I need to take it for a test drive. Let me see if the animal is a good beast of burden. And the Jew will say, no problem. Here, let's load it up. And you'll see that it walks very nicely. It can carry the load very, very easily. This might happen on Erev Shabbos, right before Shkia. Yeah. And the Jew will say to the goy, hold on to it. I'll come back for it after Shabbos. You can test drive it all you want on the Sabbath. And he's ready to lend it to him. But what happens is that as he's saying those words and Shabbos enters, the animal hears his owner's voice, and the animal walks after the owner, the Jewish owner. And in the course of doing that, the Jewish owner is pleased because he's able to thereby demonstrate the strength of the animal. And so therefore we're concerned that right before the Gentile takes possession of the animal to borrow it for a test drive, it's already demonstrating its strength while still in the ownership of the Jew. And it happens over Shabbos, as Shabbos enters. And then it's going to turn out that a Jew's animal will be doing malacha on Shabbos. Out of that concern of the test drive situation, we prohibit all types of sales to a Gentile of a Jewish animal. So it seems to be a bit of a contrivance, wouldn't you say? So the Gemara now says, well, we're gonna come back to that in a minute.
Let's do it Erev Shabbos.
Okay, so we'll come back to that.
Right.
So maskef la Rav Shisha bereda Ravidi uschirus mikanya. So we're going to now question a premise that we had already put forth. We had said as a premise that once you rent something, it for all intensive purposes belongs to the renter and not to the owner. Is that really so? V'hatnan af b'makam sh'amru lahaskir lo lebeis dira amru b'pnei shemachnas l'socha avodas kochavim. There's a Mishnah that says, we're going to learn later on, that you're not allowed to give real estate away to a Gentile, but you're allowed to rent real estate in Chutz La'aretz to an idolater. And the Mishnah says that even though you're allowed to rent him real estate, that's only for, let's say, for warehouse storage. But you can't rent him real estate even in Chutz La'aretz if he's going to bring his idolatry into his home. Because, so the question then is, V'isal kadaitach schiras kanya haiki kama ayil lebeise kama ayil. And if your argument is that a renter, for all intensive purposes, owns the property that he's renting, who cares if he brings his avodah zarah? It's not the Jew's house any longer. So the Gemara answers, Shaini avodas kochavim dechamira dechsiv v'lo savi so'eva el beisecha. That is not so problematic, says the Gemara. You could answer that by saying that we're more machmir when it comes to avodah zarah. Granted, for all intensive purposes, the house during the rental period belongs to the idolater. But Lamaisa, my name is still on the title of the house. And the Torah is especially stringent when it comes to idolatry, as it says, do not bring an abomination into your house. And therefore, even though technically it's the goy's, but since my name is still associated with it, we're more machmir.
Sounds like Marasayan.
Almost, well, it could be almost like a Marasayan, but it seems like we're basing it on a pasuk, so it's almost like a special takanas chachamim. So Maskef lo Rav Yitzchak Bereda Rav Mesharshia Schiras Mikanya. Okay, you got out of that one, but let me show you another example where renting something does not make you the owner. Because V'hatanan Yisrael shesochar pora mikohen ya'achilena karshinei truma v'kohen shesochar pora mi Yisrael afal pi shemezanoseha alav lo ya'achilena karshinei truma. There's a Mishnah having nothing to do with idolatry now. But if a Jew rents a cow from a kohen who's the owner, the Yisrael is allowed to feed the animal cress from truma, because technically it's still the Kohen's animal. And conversely, if a Kohen rents an animal from a Yisrael owner, the Kohen is not permitted to give the animal truma, because it's not his animal. Now, v'isal kadaitach schiras kanya ma'lo yachilena paradidehi. And if you're going to argue that during the rental period it belongs to the renter, why can't the Kohen give the animal truma? It's his animal, is it not? So the Gemara says, from the power of this brisa, elashma mina schiras lo kanya. You have to conclude that we were mistaken in our premise. That in reality, when you rent or borrow something, it's still the property of the original owner. It is not your property. Now that we've established that, va'ashta de amar schiras lo kanya, gzera mishum schiras, ugzera mishum she'ela, ugzera mishum nisyone. And now we get to the real answer. Now that we've established that as fact, it turns out that when an idolater rents a cow, it still belongs in the possession of the Jewish owner. And so therefore, the reason why the rabbis banned selling an animal to an idolater is for three concerns. You may come to lease it to the idolater, you may come to lend it to the idolater, and thirdly, you may come to let him take a test drive right before Shabbos, even before he takes possession, and therefore the animal's going to do malach in all three cases while still in the possession of a Jew.
If schiras l'kanya, how can we rent a space for chametz on Pesach, or rent a house to a goy for Pesach?
That's a good question. That's a good question. So you have to say that it's an excellent question. So you have to say that either this Gemara is not a liba de hilchasa, because we haven't seen the final psak halacha, or it could be that legabe certain things it helps, legabe other things it doesn't help. In other words, schirus, why are we maskir the makam to the goy when we sell the chametz? So that he can make a kinyan. We rent it to the goy so that he can make a kinyan agav the karka. So
basically, say I own an apartment building.
Yeah.
And have Gentiles who live in the apartment building at chametz, and it's my building.
But the chametz doesn't belong to you. Even if the house belongs to you, the chametz. You can have 1 second. You can have a goy. You can have a goy bring chametz into your own house on Pesach, right? So it could be that for purposes of kinyan agav, right? Then schiras is enough. I don't know, but it's an excellent question. Rav Ada shara lizvune chamra ida de safsira. Now Rav Ada permitted selling an animal. A Jew selling an animal to an akum via an agent. Even if the agent is Jewish, he said that's okay. And you want to know why? Imishum nisyune halo yada lekale, the azla machmase. You don't have to worry about the test drive scenario because that concern was only when the animal would hear the voice of its owner, right before Shabbos. But now that the agent is selling it, the owner's not involved. The animal won't hear his voice. V'imishum she'ela uschiris kevin delav delo didehi lo moishel v'lo moger. And if the concern is rental and lending, the agent was only authorized to sell. And if he's not authorized to lend it, then you don't have to worry that he's going to do that. Va'od mishum delo nigli beimuma. And certainly, when you're an agent and you get a commission off the sale, you're not going to want the Gentile to borrow it to take it for a test drive, because like a used car salesman, the less the guy knows about the quality of the animal, the better the chance that you'll be able to make the sale. You don't want him to discover any unknown blemishes.
If he sells it to a goy, then we're not bothered. If the agent sells it to the goy.
The Gemara here is not discussing the issue of unfair sales because you've covered up a blemish. That's not what the Gemara is dealing with over here. The Gemara is saying psychologically, it could very well be that there's no difference in halacha between deceiving a Gentile and deceiving a Yid. If you know that there's a blemish, then you have a halachic obligation to reveal that to both a Jew and a Gentile when you sell something. The Gemara is just simply saying the psychology of an agent is he's going to be very reluctant before he allows the Gentile to take possession of it before buying it. And it's not just a Gentile, it's any person, even a Jew, because he doesn't want him to say, hey, I found something. Rav Huna zavin hahu para la'obe kochavim. Amar le Rav Chisda maitama ovid mar hachi. So Rav Huna did something that at face value is exactly contrary to our Mishnah. He went ahead and he sold a cow to an akum. And Rav Chisda said to him, Rebbe, what are you doing? The Mishnah says you can't do that. So Amar le, Emer l'shchita zavna. So Rav Huna said an earth-shattering chiddush. He says the only time that the Mishnah prohibits me from selling a cow to an akum is only when he tells me expressly that he plans to use it as a beast of burden. But if he doesn't say anything, I'm permitted to assume that he's going to shecht it right away for meat, and therefore I don't have to worry that he's going to end up using it to do malacha on Shabbos, and therefore the whole gezerah does not apply. In other words, the only time that Chazal made their gezerah, that I'm not allowed to sell an animal to a goy, is only when there's a possibility that he's going to be working it on Shabbos, because he's revealed that to me. But if he hasn't revealed it to me, I'm allowed to assume leniently that he's not going to be working with it, but rather using it for slaughter. The Gemara says, "Uminad tamer damrinan ki agavna." So the question on Rav Huna is, where do you get this from? How do you know that you can make these lenient assumptions? Ditnan, Beishamai Omrim, Lo Yimkar Adam Para HaChoreshes Bashvias, Ubeis Hillel Matirim Pnei Sheyachol L'Shochta. That Beishamai say that you're not permitted to sell an animal that is used for plowing, a beast of burden. You're not allowed to sell it during the Shemitah year to someone because maybe that person will use it for prohibited plowing during the Shemitah year. And Beis Hillel say, no, it's perfectly permitted to sell such an animal, even when the Jew who's the buyer is suspect of violating Shemitah. And you know why? Because you can assume that he'll use it for slaughter and not for plowing.
Doesn't that apply to the Jews during a regular Shabbos year?
Well, that's what we're saying. That's what we're saying. He's saying your Beis Hillel saying. Yeah, that's what the example. That's the example that we're giving. The proof. This is what Rav Huna is arguing. Yeah. You see from Beis Hillel that you're allowed to sell a beast of burden to a Yisrael who's chashud on Shemitah, that he's suspect of working the animal during Shemitah. Beis Hillel, so you can still sell it to him during Shemitah. You know why? Because you can assume that he'll use it for slaughter instead of using it for working. In the same vein, argues Rav Huna, that you're allowed to sell an animal to an akum with the assumption that he'll slaughter it and not work with it.
It's an unusual thing because beasts of burden usually the meat is tough, you wouldn't think that.
No, that's all they had. They didn't have any distinction in those days.
In those days, they didn't farm them differently necessarily.
This is a plow. This is direct. An animal that was for plowing. It was trained to be a plow. What do you call it?
Well,
no, not as a beast of burden. It wasn't. Its major usage was plowing.
So maybe like an ox.
it says a para. It says a cow.
Yeah, but look at Rashi. Yeah, no,
Right, it says-
so it's,
Yeah.
it's a plow.
Right.
What I'm saying is that it
It's-
was learned.
It was
Trained.
even if it was
Trained.
designated for plowing, and even if it was trained to plow, right? Like Rashi says, "Hamilu medis lachrosh," that it was trained to plow. But you could still assume that the goy will use it for, or the yid will use it for meat. Amar Rabba. So Rabba says it's not a good analogy. Mi dame hasamein adam mitzuv al shvisas behemto b'shvias. Hacha adam mitzuv al shvisas behemto b'shavas. He says it's not a good analogy. You know why? Because what's the worst that could happen if I end up selling my animal to a Jew on Shemitah? The worst that'll happen is he'll end up working with that animal. And if I had lent it to him, he'll end up using my animal to plow with. But still, there's no isser that's traceable back to me because there's no prohibition of my animal working during Shemitah. But by selling an animal or lending an animal to a Gentile, if he ends up working with that animal on Shabbos, that violation is traceable back to me because my animal is not allowed to work on Shabbos, and if it does, I incur a violation even if I'm miles away from that animal that's working on Shabbos, but if it belongs to me. So just because Beis Hillel is lenient in the case of selling an animal during Shemitah to somebody, doesn't mean that he's necessarily will be lenient in selling an animal to a goy who will use the animal on Shabbos. Amar le Abaye v'chol heicha da'adam mitzuva aser. So Abaye says, you want to create that distinction and say that if through my sale the object that's being used will be traceable back to me, then that's going to be aser. Let me show you an example where that's not true. V'harei sadeh da'adam mitzuva al shvisa sadeu b'shvias. Utznan beishamai omrim lo yimkar adam stay near bashvias so beisil matmin v'sheyachalo vira. You have a similar machlokas not only by selling an animal during Shemitah, but by selling real estate during Shemitah. Beishamai says that if you have a field that is freshly plowed and ready for planting, let's call this day near, you're not allowed to sell it during Shemitah because what's it going to be used for? Obviously, the person is going to use it for planting. And Beis Hillel say, not at all. You can sell it because who knows? Maybe the purchaser will flatten the soil and use it as a utility lot and not for planting.
Parking lot.
A parking lot, yeah.
Or-
Right, he'll dig ditches in it and use it for storage. Who knows what he'll use it for? So the question, therefore, is, you see an example over here where I have an obligation to make sure that my land remains fallow during the Shemitah year, and yet I'm still, according to Beis Hillel, allowed to sell it. So why should it be any different from selling an animal to a goy? So you see that just because the goy is going to use it during Shabbos should not be traceable back to me. So maskef lo Ravashi v'chol heicha de'ein adam mitzu v'shari. In other words, this is in support of Rav Huna. So maskef lo Ravashi v'chol heicha de'ein adam mitzu v'shari v'harei kelim de'ein adam mitzu v'al shvisas kelim b'shvias. So Ravashi takes it in the opposite direction. You mean to tell me that if I sell an item where it's the isser of that item is not traceable back to me, then it's okay? Let me show you an example where that's not the case. For example, there's no prohibition if my tools do work during Shemitah. I can't have my land be worked, but if my tools work the land during Shemitah, someone else's land, there's no prohibition. Utnan eluhin kelim shein adam rashai lamochron bashvias hamachreisha v'chol keleha ha'ol v'hamizareh v'hadeker. And yet the Mishnah says explicitly that there are certain tools that are used for agriculture that you're not allowed to sell during the Shemitah year. You cannot sell a plow or any of its accoutrements. You cannot sell a yoke. You cannot sell a pitchfork that's used for winnowing. And you cannot sell a shovel or a hoe. So Ella, why should that be? According to the distinction you were trying to make between the animal and the real estate, as long as the animal's work does not incur a prohibition for me because there's no prohibition for my animal to work during Shemitah, then it's okay. Well, if that's the argument, then why is it prohibited for me to sell tools during Shemitah? Ela Amar Ravashi kol hecha deika lemitla talinan ve'alfagav de mitzuva v'kol hecha deleka lemitli lo talinan alfagav de eno mitzuva. So the Gemara says, here's the real distinction. It's got nothing to do whether the object is traceable back to me. What it's got to do with is, can I make assumptions about its use that it can be used for permissible uses? That's the issue. Any time that I can make an assumption leniently that it could be used for non-prohibited use, I'm allowed to sell that item. But if I cannot make such an assumption because it's outside the realm of possibility, of likelihood, so then it's usher for me to sell it. So in the case of Rav Huna, where I'm going to sell the cow to a goy, that's permitted. Why? Because I can assume that he's going to shecht it. Same thing when it comes to the animal during Shemitah. Even though it's a beast of burden, nonetheless, if it's possible that the guy will shecht it and eat it, perfectly okay. Same thing with real estate, says Beis Hillel. Even though it's freshly plowed and it's ready for planting, but it could also be used for digging ditches or for a parking lot, and therefore I'm allowed to sell it. Tools are different. What do you use a hoe for? What do you use a pitchfork for? What do you use a plow for? There's only one use for those things, for agriculture. You're not going to use those to clean your ears, right? Cracking walnuts, right? So therefore, it can only be for one purpose. You cannot make any assumptions of leniency, and that's the reason why you can't sell it. Okay. Now here's another story. Rabbi once sold a donkey to a Jew who was suspect of selling it in turn to an Oved Kochavim. And here's the problem. Rabbi, what you're doing is lifnei iver. You're causing a Jew to do something that's usher because he's going to sell a donkey that is not used for shechita. It's only used as a beast of burden, and he's going to be in violation of the Mishnah. So Amar le Abaya, my time of it
lifnei like we did last time.
Tosfos asked that question, and the answer is, it's a very good question. Tosfos says,
lifnei.
Yeah, so it's an indirect lifnei iver. Tosfos says, no, it's a direct lifnei iver because you're causing him to violate the Mishnah. That's the way, that's because I, that's
last
the way.
Time
it was, you're causing the Gentile to cause another Gentile to sin.
So it was Jew, goy, and this time it's Jew, goy. That's the difference.
Right, Jew, goy. Okay, so my time Ovid Marhachi. So why did you do it this way? Like, why did you do? What heter do you have to do this? So Amarlei Anali Yisrael Zivini. So Rabbi said, "What's the problem? I sold it to a Jew. I didn't sell it to a goy." Amarlei v'ha'azilu mazmelei lo ebikochavim. Yeah, but this Jew is going to turn around and sell it to an akum, so you're causing him to sin. So the Gemara answers, La obikochavim kamazbin lisrael lo kamazbin. So Rabbi said, what's the big deal? What, he's only going to sell it to an akum? He could just as easily sell it to another Jew. So therefore, just like we are allowed to make lenient assumptions, you can make a lenient assumption over here also. It's possible he'll sell it to a goy, but if he finds a Jew who's willing to buy, he'll sell it to him. So there's no definite lifnei iver. So Eisvei, let's raise a challenge to that whole line of reasoning. In other words, Rabbah is trying to take a liberty with this, just like we said before, but it's not going to be so simple, as you'll see. There's a brisa that says as follows: Makom shenagu limkor behimadaka lukusim mochrin, shelo limkor ein mochrin. Now this is different from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah was talking about an akum, an idolater. This brisa is talking about a kusi. Now the confusing part about kusim in Shas is that historically their status changed at a certain point. Sometimes they were considered to be like idolaters. Later in their history, when the rabbis found that they were mamish, worshipping idols, but at an earlier stage of their history, they were treated as Jews who changed certain aspects of the law because they rejected Torah Shabbal Peh, and therefore they were treated as a Yisrael Mumar, as a sinful Jew. And so their status, you have to know when you're studying a brisa, the historical context of the brisa, which is sometimes the source of confusion. As will become clear, this brisa is treating them like a Yisrael Mumer, like a Jew, who just is not doing the right thing. And therefore it says that when you're selling an animal to a kusi, it's technically okay, unless the minhag is not to. Unless the minhag is not to sell to a kusi, in which case you're not allowed to. Rashi says, by inference, since this brisa is only talking about a behema daka, it sounds like a behema gasa, you're never allowed to sell to a kusi. You're never allowed to sell a behema gasa to a kusi. So let's now see.
Because they're working on Shabbos.
Hold on, you're going to see in just a second. So my time. So what's the reason? What's the reason why you cannot sell them a behema gasa? Maybe you'll tell me because they're suspect of bestiality. Since when are they suspect? V'hatanya ein mamidim behema bepundako shel ovdei kochavim zecharim eitzel zechar munekevos eitzel nekevos ve'ein sarach lomer nekevos eitzel zechar muzecharim eitzel nekevos. That you're not allowed to set up an animal that belongs to a Jew in the shuk of an ovdei kochavim. And that's true even if you put a male animal with a male idolater or a female animal with a female idolater, and certainly it's forbidden if their genders are the opposite. If the genders are the opposite, then certainly there's a suspicion of bestiality. But even when the genders are the same, there's a concern about bestiality, a male-on-male bestiality. If they're going to commit an act of bestiality, they'll do homosexual bestiality too. And Rashi says that female on female, even though that's not possible to commit bestiality, but the concern is, as we'll see later on in the Gemara, that maybe her boyfriend will come along and commit bestiality with the female animal. So ve'ein mosrin behema l'roa shelahen, and furthermore, you're not allowed to give an animal to a akum shepherd, ve'ein misyachdin imohin, and you're not allowed to have yichud with an akum. Not because of not because of sexuality, but rather because an akum is suspect of committing murder. So for your own safety, you can't have yichud with him because who knows when he'll take out a dagger. And you're not allowed to take a Jewish child and have him apprentice and learn either a trade or learn something educational from an akum. Because of child molestation or because of murder. Avol ma'amidim behema bepundako shel kusim zechar meitzel nekevos and nekevos eitzel zecharim ve'ein sarach lomer zechar meitzel zecharim and nekevos eitzel nekevos umosin behema l'roya shelehenu misyachdin imon umosin lantinok l'lamdo sefer l'lamdo umnus. But when it comes to a kusi is not suspect of bestiality. He's not suspect of murder. He's not suspect of child molestation. So all of the things that we forbade by an akum, we permit for a kusi. So alma lo chashidi. So we see that they're not suspect of doing any of these things. Va'otanya, and we have another bryce. So again, our question is, why would there even be a minhag for a behema daka not to give them a behema daka? Not to sell them a behema daka. It can't be because of bestiality. Va'otam, we have another brisa that says, Ein mochin lahem lo zayin v'lo klei zayin, ve'ein mashchizin lenas zayin, ve'ein mochin lahem lo sadan v'lo kolarin, v'lo kavolim, v'lo shal barzel, echad ovikol chavim v'echad kusi. There's a brisa that says that neither to an akum nor to a kusi are you allowed to sell the following things that could use to cause harm to a Jew. You cannot sell them weaponry. You cannot sell them things that could be used like chains that could be used to imprison Jews or stockades or anything like that that could be used to oppress or to persecute or harm Jews. And that applies equally to an akum or to a kusi. Now, my timer, what's the reason it applies to a kusi? It can't be because you suspect a kusi of using those weapons himself to kill Jews, because we just said that you're allowed to have yichud with the kusi. So they're not suspect of committing murder. So So the answer must be that the reason why you can't sell something to a kusi is because we suspect that he will turn around and sell them to an akum. So therefore, in other words, if the weapon will eventually get into the hands of the akum through the kusi, then you're not allowed to sell it to the kusi. And the same thing should apply by a behema gasa. If I'm not allowed to sell a behema gasa to an akum, I shouldn't be allowed to sell it to a kusi if I think he's going to turn around and sell it to an akum. So the question is on Rabba, how could you sell a Jew something that you know he's going to turn around and sell to an akum? V'chitema kusi lo avid shuva, Yisrael avid shuva. Maybe you'll tell me, well, there still is an inherent difference between a kusi and a Yisrael. A kusi doesn't do tshuva, so therefore by selling something to him that is contraband, it's going to definitely get into the hands of the akum. It's always forbidden. But a Yisrael, I can sell it to him because maybe he'll have thoughts of rehabilitation and he won't turn around and sell it to an akum. But wait a minute. V'hamar Rav Nachman Amar Rabba bar Avua keder shamru asul limkor lo v'kol chavim kach asul limkor l'Yisrael hachashel limkor lo v'kol chavim. But that's explicitly not the opinion of Rav Nachman and Rabba bar Avua. They say that just like you can't sell certain items to a kusi because he's going to turn around and sell them to an akum, you also can't sell those things to a Yisrael who's suspect of violating the law. So again, the kasha on you, Rabbi, is what right did you have to sell that Jew an animal if we know that he's suspect of turning around and selling it to an akum? So Rohid Basrei Tlasa Parse, V'ikadamri Parsa B'chala V'lo Adreche. So Rabba, upon realizing his mistake, because he's being basically shown that he did something incorrect, so he ran after the buyer for 3 parses, which is a very long distance. And some say that it was only 1 parsa, but it was in sand, so it was much harder to traverse. But he wasn't able to catch up with the guy, and Rabba must have felt very bad. Amar Avdimi bar Abba keder she'asur limkor la'ovi kol chavim, asur limkor listim Yisrael. Going back to the case of weapons, just like you're not allowed to sell weapons to an akum because he could use it against a Jew, you're also not allowed to sell weapons to a Jewish robber because he may end up using it. So, heichi dami, ida chashed dekatel pshita, hainu avi kol chavim, v'ida lo katel amai lo. So the Gemara says, explain this Jewish robber to me. If he's suspect of using it to kill Jews, then why would I think he's any different? Of course, that's obvious that you can't. And if he's a kind-hearted robber, because he's Jewish, then what's wrong with selling him weapons? So why he's not going to use them against the Jew? So the Gemara says, La'olam de lo katel v'hacha b'mayaskinan b'mash mota d'zimnin da'avid li'itzulei nafshe. So the Gemara says, we're talking about a kind-hearted robber who normally would never dream of using a weapon against a fellow Jew. But the concern is like this. That's only under normal circumstances. He's not going to commit armed robbery and ever shoot anybody. But if he's about to be caught, the sirens go off and the police are running after him, and there's this whole car chase, in order to save his own skin, he might be tempted to use the weapon. In a desperate situation, he would use the weapon, and therefore you're not allowed to sell it to him. Okay, now, the Gemara now says, Tanu Rabbana, here's a brisa, Ein mochen lehem trisen, v'yesh omrim mochen lehem trisen. So there's a brisa that has 2 opinions. One opinion is that you're not allowed to sell shields to an akum. Now, a shield is a weapon, but it's not an offensive weapon. It's a defensive weapon. So some say that you're allowed to sell it, and some say you're not allowed to sell it.
Unless you're Captain America and you're throwing it.
So hold on a second. So
It can be used to Captain America.
hold on a second. My timer. So the Gemara says, what's the reason? Ilema mishum de magnu alayhu. Maybe you'll tell me because you're helping an akum, you're helping protect his life, and we want to uproot idolatry, and by selling him a shield, you're helping to save his life.
We want him dead.
So ihachi afilu chiti v'sari namilo. If that's the case, then why should it be permitted to sell him wheat and barley? You're sustaining him, right? So Amarav im efsher hachanami. So he says, Taka, if it would be possible not to sell them wheat and barley, that would also be preferred. Because the only reason why we have a heter to do so, to sell them, is because if we wouldn't sell them, there would be tremendous anti-Semitism, and it would be curtains for the Jews in the diaspora. So we have no choice when it comes to wheat and barley, but it could be that for shields we're not allowed to sell. But Ika da Amri, so others learn as follows. Tris and Hainotai Medelo, Dechisholim Zinaihu, Katli Begavayu. Some say that the reason why you're not allowed to sell shields, according to that opinion, is because when a person runs out of regular offensive weapons, he'll use his shield as a weapon of offense.
Amazing.
Like he'll be Captain America, right? He'll use his shield and throw it, and he'll use the edge of the shield to try and slit throats. And actually, I think there were shields that were manufactured with very sharp edges in the ancient world in order to be able to use them as weapons of offense.
It's in one hand. Right?
Yeah, the Yesh Omrim and others say, Mochrim lehem trisim dechishalim zinayu ma'arik arki. The opinion that says that you're allowed to sell them shields is because they view the method of warfare of an akum is that once he runs out of offensive weapons, he drops his shield, drops everything, and just runs for it.
Like the Egyptians, 6 they were.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
Once they run, once he runs out of guns, runs out of bullets. That's it. He runs away. So therefore, don't worry about it. You can sell him a shield. So Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravu, halacha ki yesh omrim. The halacha is like the yesh omrim that it is permitted to sell them shields. And Amar Ravada Bar Ahava ein mochrim lahem ashashi o shel barzel. Now another halacha, you're not allowed to sell them bars of iron because they could always melt down the bars of iron to manufacture weaponry. My time mishum dechol sheminayu klei zayin. That's what I just said. So ihachi afilu mori v'chatzini nami. Well, if that's the case, why are we allowed to sell them anything made out of iron? Why can we sell them hoes and shovels? If they can melt it down and make weapons, then we shouldn't sell them anything that's made out of metal. So the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Zvid b'parzela hindua. We're talking. The only thing that you're not allowed to sell them are bars of a special Indian kind of iron, which is specially used for manufacturing weapons. Like, today that you talk about Japanese steel or German steel is especially good it's especially hard for manufacturing weapons or knives. So that's it's only when it's a special quality of steel that you can't sell them the bars. Now v'ha'idna dekamezav ninan amaravashi leparsayu demagnu ilavan. What about today that we do sell them metal? Even when we know that it could be used for manufacturing of weapons, because it's a special Indian iron, Rav Ashi says to sell to the Persians, it's okay.
They're on our side.
Because they're on our side, they're going to protect us. Famous last words, the Persians are on our side. Okay.